The day the sky fractured was the day everything changed. It began as a shimmer in the atmosphere, like sunlight dancing on water, but soon the anomaly expanded, casting the earth in hues of violet and silver. From the rupture emerged the ships, impossibly sleek, obsidian vessels that reflected no light yet shimmered with a faint, internal glow. They hovered in silence over the great capitals of the world, Washington, Beijing, London, and more. Humanity watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded. Dr. Elena Torres stood among them, her eyes locked on the ship hovering over New York City. As a renowned astrophysicist, she had dedicated her life to unraveling the universe's mysteries, but even she was unprepared for this. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her breath fogging the window of her cramped office at the Manhattan Institute of Technology. Beside her, Thomas Grayson, a young journalist hungry for his first major story, adjusted his camera. "Beautiful? Terrifying is more like it," he said, glancing at her. "What do they want?" Elena shook her head, her fingers tightening around the edge of her desk. "That's the question, isn't it?" The answer came hours later. Across every device capable of transmitting sound or image, a single voice spoke, calm, deliberate, and alien. Its tone was neither male nor female, and its words carried an unsettling clarity. "We are the Arkaid. We come not as conquerors but as witnesses. Humanity stands at a precipice, and our presence here will determine which path you take. You will not harm us. You cannot harm us. Observe and be observed," the message repeated in every known language before falling silent. The world erupted into chaos. Governments scrambled to decipher the cryptic message, while religious leaders declared it a test of faith. Protests broke out in cities, and social media overflowed with theories ranging from doomsday predictions to claims of divine intervention. Elena, however, saw opportunity. She was one of the few chosen to attend a summit of global scientists tasked with interpreting the Arkaid's message. The summit, held at the United Nations, was a whirlwind of arguments and speculation. Some believed the Arkaid were offering guidance. Others saw it as a veiled threat. "They're testing us," Elena argued during one heated debate. "They're here to observe how we respond under pressure, whether we collapse into infighting or rise above it." Her words carried weight, but not enough to unite the room. Factions formed quickly, mirroring the divisions outside. Meanwhile, Thomas followed the story from the ground. His editor had tasked him with covering the human angle, the protests, the fear, the hope. But what captivated him most were the ships themselves. They never moved, never emitted a sound, yet their presence was suffocating. Every attempt to analyze or approach them ended in failure. Military drones vanished without a trace, and scientific instruments registered nothing but anomalies. Late one night, Thomas found himself in Times Square, staring up at the Arkaid ship. It hung there like a black hole, consuming the stars. He turned on his camera and began speaking. Day 3 of the Arkaid presence. No answers, only questions. The world is holding its breath, waiting for something. He paused, noticing a small group gathered nearby. They were silent, their faces illuminated by the flickering lights of the billboards. One of them, a young woman clutching a sign that read "Welcome," caught his eye. "Do you think they'll help us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Thomas hesitated. "I don't know, but I think they're watching more than they're saying." The days stretched into a tense standoff. World leaders debated whether to confront or appease the Arkaid, while scientists like Elena worked tirelessly to decode their intentions. The central conflict began to crystallize. Humanity's response to the unknown. Would fear and mistrust dominate, or could cooperation and understanding prevail? A moment of quiet reflection. Elena stands on the roof of her building, gazing up at the ship. Beside her, Thomas, Camera in hand, breaks the silence. "Do you think they're judging us?" "I think they already have," Elena replies. Her voice is steady, but her expression betrays the weight of the uncertainty. Together, they watch the alien vessel, their fates, and perhaps humanity's, hanging in the balance. The world teetered on the brink of chaos. Every government, every leader sought answers, but the Arkaid ships remained silent. The longer they hovered, the more humanity unraveled. Fear turned to suspicion, and suspicion bred hostility. Yet, amidst the turmoil, two figures found themselves thrust into the heart of an escalating conflict: Dr. Elena Torres and Thomas Grayson. Elena sat in the dimly lit conference hall, surrounded by scientists, military officials, and diplomats. The summit had devolved into arguments, the tension suffocating. General Marcus Stanton, his uniform adorned with medals, slammed his fist on the table. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to make the first move. We need to act." Elena leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "Act how, General? Any attempt to engage them has failed. We don't understand their technology, their intentions. They've left us no choice." Stanton interrupted. "They're provoking us, testing our defenses. Or perhaps they're waiting to see if we destroy ourselves first." Elena shot back, her words cutting through the noise. The room fell silent, her statement hanging in the air like a challenge. Meanwhile, Thomas was on the ground, documenting the human cost of the crisis. Protests had turned violent in several cities, with opposing factions clashing over how to respond to the Arkaid. On one side were those who advocated for diplomacy, desperate to avoid conflict with a technologically superior species. On the other were those who demanded aggression, convinced the aliens posed a threat to humanity's survival. Thomas found himself in the middle of one such protest in downtown Manhattan. The air was thick with tear gas, the shouts of protesters mixing with the wails of sirens. He raised his camera, capturing the chaos. A line of police officers in riot gear advancing on a crowd, their shields gleaming in the harsh light of street lamps. A voice called out behind him, "Hey, journalist, you want a real story?" Thomas turned to see a young man in a tattered jacket, holding a crude device, a homemade drone rigged with explosives. His eyes burned with desperation. "If they won't fight back, we'll make them." Before Thomas could respond, the man launched the drone, sending it hurtling toward the Arkaid ship above. The device ascended rapidly, its whirring blades cutting through the night. Then, just as it approached the ship, it vanished. No explosion, no debris, just an empty sky where the drone had been. The crowd froze, staring upward. The ship remained motionless, its black surface absorbing the city's lights. Slowly, the realization sank in. The Arkaid were untouchable. Back at the summit, news of the incident arrived like a shockwave. Stanton seized the moment, his voice rising above the murmurs. "This is exactly why we need to act. The longer we wait, the more unstable the situation becomes." Elena stood, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "And what do you suggest, General? Launching an attack? Risking global annihilation against an enemy we don't understand?" "Better to die fighting than cowering in fear," Stanton growled. Elena's eyes narrowed. Spoken like a man who's never considered the consequences of his actions. The room erupted into shouting once more, but this time Elena didn't stay to argue. She walked out, her mind racing. Every attempt to analyze the Arkaid had failed, their technology defying human understanding. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the Arkaid weren't here to destroy. If that were their intent, they would have done so already. That night, as she stood on the roof of her building, Thomas joined her, his camera slung over his shoulder. "I thought you'd be at the summit," he said, leaning against the railing. "They're not interested in finding answers," Elena replied, her gaze fixed on the ship above. They're interested in posturing. Thomas nodded. You think the Arkaid are waiting for us to implode? I think they're testing us, Elena said. Not just our technology, but our humanity. How we respond to the unknown. Thomas considered her words. And how are we doing so far? Elena sighed. Not well. The following day, Stanton's faction took control of the summit, pushing forward with a plan to confront the Arkaid directly. A fleet of drones armed with nuclear warheads was prepared for a coordinated strike. Elena protested vehemently, but her objections were overruled. As the countdown began, Elena made a desperate decision. She contacted Thomas, who had gained access to one of the observation sites. If they launched those drones, it could be the end of us, she said over the phone. What do you want me to do? Thomas asked. Broadcast this. Elena replied. Let the world see what we're about to do and the consequences that follow. Maybe, just maybe, it'll make them stop. Thomas hesitated, then nodded. You'll have it live in 10 minutes. As the drones launched, the world held its breath. The devices streaked toward the Arkaid ships, their trails glowing against the dark sky. But just as before, they vanished, erased from existence without a trace. The ships, unscathed, remained motionless. Then, for the first time since their arrival, the Arkaid responded. Beams of light shot down from the ships, not as weapons, but as messages. Symbols and patterns danced in the air, incomprehensible to most but unmistakably intentional. Elena watched from the observation site, her heart pounding. They're communicating, she whispered. We pushed them, and now they're responding. The world frozen in anticipation. The Arkaid's cryptic message a spark of hope, or perhaps a warning. Elena and Thomas exchange a look, both understanding that humanity's next steps will define their future. The beams of light continued to shimmer, casting intricate patterns against the night sky. Across the world, people gathered in hushed groups, their fear giving way to awe. For the first time, the Arkaid were speaking, though their language remained a puzzle. In the observation site, Elena stood transfixed, her mind racing. The symbols shifted and morphed, reminding her of mathematical equations, a universal language. This isn't just communication, she murmured. It's an invitation. Thomas adjusted his camera, capturing the scene. An invitation to what? To understand, Elena said, her voice trembling with excitement. She turned to the military officials present. We need linguists, mathematicians, anyone who can help decode this. If we don't try to understand them now, we may never get another chance. General Stanton, standing nearby, scoffed. And if this is a trap? It's not, Elena said firmly. If the Arkaid wanted to destroy us, they could have done it 1,000 times over. This is a test of whether we're worth engaging with. Let me try. After a tense moment, Stanton nodded begrudgingly. You have 24 hours. The makeshift team worked tirelessly, poring over the patterns and comparing them to known mathematical principles and linguistic frameworks. Elena led the effort, her sharp mind unraveling the clues hidden within the symbols. As hours passed, a breakthrough emerged. The symbols represented a sequence of prime numbers, interspersed with patterns resembling star maps. They're giving us coordinates, Elena realized, her voice brimming with urgency. They want us to send a signal back. The suggestion met immediate resistance. We can't trust them, Stanton argued. For all we know, this could be a ploy to draw us into a trap. And what if it's not? Elena countered. What if this is the only way to prove we're capable of more than fear and violence? It took hours of debate, but eventually, Elena's reasoning prevailed. Using the world's most advanced communication arrays, a team transmitted a response based on the decoded symbols. The message was simple. We see you. We want to understand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Arkaid ship above New York began to move. Slowly, it descended, its surface shimmering like liquid obsidian. Panic rippled through the streets as people braced for the worst. But the ship stopped 100 feet above the ground, a soft hum resonating from its core. A section of the ship opened, and from within emerged a being. The Arkaid was humanoid in shape, but distinctly alien. Its form was translucent, its internal structure glowing faintly with shifting colors. It moved with a grace that defied gravity, its presence simultaneously mesmerizing and unnerving. Elena was among the delegation chosen to meet the being. As she approached, her heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment that would define everything. The Arkaid extended a hand-like appendage, and without hesitation, Elena reached out to meet it. The contact wasn't physical but mental. In an instant, her mind flooded with images and emotions, a kaleidoscope of knowledge and history. The Arkaid's voice resonated within her mind, clear and calm. "We are here to learn, to observe. Your world teeters between destruction and potential. We have seen countless civilizations rise and fall. Prove to us that you can rise." The connection ended as abruptly as it began. Elena staggered back, her breath ragged. "They're not our enemies," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're teachers, watchers. They want us to succeed, but we have to prove we're worthy." The encounter was broadcast worldwide, sparking a cascade of reactions. Some celebrated, seeing the Arkaid's message as a call to unity and growth. Others remained skeptical, wary of the alien motives. Thomas, who had captured every moment, sat with Elena afterward. "Do you think we can do it?" he asked. Elena looked at him, her exhaustion evident. "I don't know," she admitted, "but for the first time, I feel like we have a chance." In the following weeks, the Arkaid began to share fragments of their knowledge, advances in medicine, renewable energy, and conflict resolution. But they offered no solutions, only tools, leaving humanity to decide how to use them. The ships remained silent and watchful, a constant reminder of the challenge set before Earth. Slowly, the chaos began to subside. Nations came together to address the crises that had divided them, driven by the realization that their survival depended on collaboration. One evening, as Elena and Thomas stood on the same rooftop where they had first watched the Arkaid ship, they reflected on everything that had happened. "They gave us a choice," Thomas said. "Sink or swim." Elena nodded. "And for once, I think we're learning how to swim." The two of them gazing at the sky, the Arkaid ship glowing faintly above. Humanity's journey was far from over, but for the first time in generations, the future felt full of possibility.